Hey there, welcome back to Book Demystified. I'm really glad you're here because today's book, Frugal Isn't Cheap by Clare Levison, dives into something we've all gotten completely wrong about money, and it's costing us way more than we realize. You know that moment when you're standing in Target with two versions of the same thing in your hands, one costs $12 and the other costs $35, and you automatically grab the cheaper one because that's what responsible people do, right? Or when you're shopping for anything really, a winter coat, a mattress, groceries, and your first instinct is always to find the lowest price because you've been taught that spending less money automatically makes you smarter with money? I used to do this all the time. I'd buy the cheapest version of everything and feel really proud of myself for being so disciplined and frugal until 6 months later when the cheap coat started falling apart, the mattress was giving me back pain, and I had to replace half the stuff I bought because it broke or wore out or just made my life harder instead of better. Then I'd end up spending twice as much money and feeling frustrated with myself for making bad choices. But I kept making the same mistakes over and over because I thought the problem was that I wasn't finding cheap enough stuff. What I didn't realize is that I was confusing being cheap with being smart, and there's actually a huge difference between the two that most of us never learn. Clare Levison spent decades as a financial advisor watching smart, successful people make the same money mistakes again and again. And what she discovered was that the people who built real wealth weren't the ones who spent the least money, they were the ones who spent money the most thoughtfully. Why do we keep thinking that spending less automatically means we're being smarter with money? And what if there's actually a completely different way to think about this that could save us thousands of dollars and years of frustration? Well, this book completely changed how I think about every purchase I make, and I think it's going to change yours too. Claire starts with a story that'll probably make you cringe because it's so relatable. She talks about a client who was proud of herself for buying a cheap vacuum cleaner instead of the more expensive one the salesperson recommended. This woman felt like she had won some kind of victory against consumer culture by refusing to pay extra for features she thought she didn't need. 6 months later, the cheap vacuum died, and she had to buy another one. A year after that, the second cheap vacuum died, and she bought a third one. By the time she finally bought a good vacuum that lasted, she had spent more money on vacuum cleaners than if she had just bought the expensive one in the first place. Plus, she had wasted hours of her life dealing with broken appliances and shopping for replacements. But here's the really expensive part. She had also spent 2 years living with carpets that were never really clean because the cheap vacuums didn't work very well, which meant she was embarrassed to have people over and stressed about the state of her home. She had tried to save money and ended up spending more money while also making her daily life less enjoyable. Claire calls this the cheap trap, and she says it's one of the biggest wealth destroyers in American households. We think we're being financially responsible by always choosing the lowest price, but we're actually creating a cycle where we have to keep spending money on the same things over and over again. The cheap trap isn't just about appliances. It shows up everywhere in our financial lives. We buy clothes that look good for a few months but fall apart after a season, so we have to keep buying new clothes. We choose the cheapest phone plan and then get hit with overage charges that make it more expensive than the unlimited plan would have been. We buy cheap food that doesn't satisfy us, so we end up ordering takeout later because we're still hungry. We pick the cheapest apartment we can find and then spend extra money on gas and time commuting because it's far from everything we need to do. Claire's first major concept is what she calls conscious spending, and this completely flipped my understanding of what it means to be good with money. Conscious spending means making decisions based on the total cost of ownership, not just the upfront price. It means thinking about how much something is actually going to cost you over time, including the time you'll spend dealing with problems, the money you'll spend on replacements, and the opportunity cost of choosing something that doesn't really work for your life. She gives this example of buying winter boots. The cheap boots cost $40. The good boots cost $120. Most people automatically think the frugal choice is the $40 boots, but Claire breaks down the real math.
The cheap boots will probably last one winter, maybe two if you're lucky. They won't keep your feet warm or dry in serious weather, which means you'll be uncomfortable, your feet might get wet or cold, and you'll probably end up buying a second pair halfway through winter anyway. Over 5 years, you'll spend at least $200 on cheap boots. Plus, you'll deal with the frustration of cold, wet feet every winter. The good boots will last 5 to 10 years, keep your feet comfortable in any weather, and you'll never have to think about boot shopping again until they finally wear out. The good boots don't cost $120. They cost about $12 per year when you break it down. The cheap boots cost $40 per year, plus all the hassle and discomfort that comes with them. When you look at it this way, the expensive boots are actually the frugal choice. This way of thinking applies to almost everything we buy. Clare talks about the difference between price and value, and how our culture has trained us to focus obsessively on price while completely ignoring value. Value includes how long something lasts, how well it works, how much time it saves you, how much stress it prevents, and how much joy or comfort it adds to your life. A $20 kitchen knife that makes cooking frustrating and dangerous has terrible value even though it has a low price. A $60 knife that makes cooking enjoyable and lasts for decades has incredible value even though it costs more up front. Clare's second big idea is about what she calls investment thinking versus expense thinking, and this one really changed how I approach major purchases. Most of us think about everything we buy as an expense, money going out that we'll never see again. But Clare argues that some purchases are actually investments in your future self, your health, your productivity, your happiness, or your earning potential. The key is learning to tell the difference between a real investment and just expensive stuff you want to buy. A real investment, according to Clare, is something that either saves you money over time, makes you money over time, or significantly improves your quality of life in a measurable way. A good mattress is an investment in your health and energy, which affects everything else in your life. A reliable car is an investment in your ability to get to work and earn money without constant stress about breakdowns. A high-quality work bag or professional clothes might be an investment in your career if they help you feel more confident and competent. But here's where it gets tricky. Clare warns against using investment thinking to justify buying expensive stuff you just want. A designer handbag isn't an investment unless you're planning to resell it for more money later. The latest gadget isn't an investment unless it genuinely makes you more productive or saves you significant time. A fancy gym membership isn't an investment unless you'll actually use it consistently enough to improve your health. The difference between investment thinking and wishful thinking is honest assessment of whether this purchase will actually pay for itself in concrete ways over time. Clare shares this story about a freelance graphic designer who agonized over buying an expensive computer because she had always bought the cheapest electronics she could find. But when Clare helped her think through the math, they realized that a faster, more reliable computer would save her about 5 hours per week, which meant she could take on more clients or spend more time on higher-paying projects. The expensive computer would literally pay for itself within 6 months and keep making her more money for years. The cheap computer she had been considering would probably slow her down, crash occasionally, and need to be replaced sooner, which would actually cost her more money in lost productivity and replacement costs. For this specific person in this specific situation, the expensive computer was the frugal choice. Hey, if you're getting value from these summaries and want to help us keep going, you can support us in a few simple ways. Subscribe, join as a member, or grab the book using our affiliate link below. And if you're feeling generous, you can even leave a tip via PayPal or UPI. All links are in the description. Every bit helps us bring you more like this. But Clare is also careful to point out that investment thinking can be dangerous if you use it to rationalize every expensive purchase you want to make. She introduces this concept called the investment test. 3 questions you should ask before calling any purchase an investment. First, can I measure the concrete benefit this will provide in terms of time saved, money earned, or quality of life improved? Second, will I actually use this thing consistently enough to realize that benefit? And third, is there a less expensive option that would provide 80% of the same benefit? If you can't answer these questions honestly, you're probably just wanting something expensive and trying to make it sound smart. The third major concept that really opened my eyes is what Clare calls lifestyle inflation versus lifestyle optimization.
Most personal finance advice tells you to avoid lifestyle inflation completely, to keep living like a broke college student even as your income grows. And while there's wisdom in not expanding your expenses just because you can, Clare argues this approach misses something important about human nature and long-term financial success. Lifestyle inflation is when you increase your spending automatically as your income grows, without thinking about whether those increases actually improve your life. You get a raise and immediately move to a more expensive apartment, not because you're unhappy with your current place, but because you feel like you should upgrade. You start buying organic everything, not because you care about organic food, but because it feels like what people with your income level are supposed to do. You upgrade your car, your clothes, your restaurants, your everything, just because you can afford the payments. And before you know it, you're making 50% more money, but somehow feeling just as financially stressed as before. Lifestyle optimization is completely different. It means being intentional about which upgrades actually improve your life and which ones just increase your expenses without increasing your happiness. Maybe moving to a better apartment is worth it if your current place is making you miserable, but moving to a fancier apartment just because you can afford it might not add any real value to your daily experience. Maybe buying higher quality food is worth it if it makes you feel better and enjoy cooking more, but buying expensive food just because it has fancier packaging probably isn't going to change your life. Claire tells this story about a software engineer who got a significant promotion and immediately started planning to upgrade everything in his life. Bigger apartment, nicer car, better furniture, more expensive hobbies, the whole package. But then he stopped and asked himself which of these upgrades would actually solve problems he currently had or add genuine enjoyment to his life. He realized his apartment was fine, he liked his car, and his furniture worked perfectly well. What he really wanted was the freedom to travel more and the peace of mind that comes with having substantial savings. So instead of upgrading his lifestyle across the board, he optimized just the parts that mattered to him. He did move to a slightly nicer apartment, but only because his current one had thin walls and noisy neighbors that were affecting his sleep. He kept the same car and furniture, but started budgeting for 3 international trips per year and significantly increased his savings rate. A year later, he was traveling regularly, sleeping better, and building wealth faster than he ever had before, all because he chose optimization over inflation. The fourth concept that completely changed my relationship with money is what Claire calls the quality investment mindset. This is about understanding that some things in life are worth paying more for because they'll serve you better for longer, while other things are perfectly fine to buy cheap because they're temporary or you don't use them often enough to matter. Claire introduces this framework for deciding when to spend more and when to save money that's based on 3 factors: how often you'll use it, how long you need it to last, and how much it affects your daily quality of life. If you use something every day, need it to last for years, and it significantly impacts your comfort or productivity, that's something worth investing in. If you use something occasionally, don't need it to last forever, and it doesn't really affect your day-to-day experience, that's something you can probably buy cheap without consequences. She gives this great example of kitchen equipment. A good knife that you'll use every time you cook is worth spending money on because it'll make cooking safer, faster, and more enjoyable for years. A specialized gadget that you'll use once a month doesn't need to be expensive because even if it breaks, you're not losing much functionality from your daily life. A coffee maker that you'll use every morning for the next decade is worth getting a good one because bad coffee every day adds up to a lot of small frustrations over time. A blender that you'll use occasionally for smoothies can be basic because even if it's not perfect, it's not affecting your daily routine significantly. This framework helps you avoid both the cheap trap and the expensive trap. You're not automatically buying the cheapest version of everything, but you're also not automatically buying the most expensive version just because you think that's what responsible people do. You're making decisions based on how each purchase actually fits into your real life. Claire also talks about something she calls the compound effect of quality, which is about how buying better things doesn't just save you money on replacements, it can actually improve multiple areas of your life in ways you don't expect. She tells the story about a woman who finally bought a really good mattress after years of sleeping on cheap ones that hurt her back. The mattress cost more than she had ever spent on furniture, and she felt guilty about it for weeks. But 6 months later, she realized the better sleep had improved her energy during the day, her mood, her productivity at work, and even her relationships because she wasn't constantly tired and cranky.
The mattress had paid for itself in ways she couldn't have predicted, not just by lasting longer than cheap mattresses, but by improving her whole life in small but meaningful ways. This is what Claire means when she says, "Frugal isn't cheap." Being frugal means being smart about where your money goes and what it accomplishes for you. Being cheap means automatically choosing the lowest price without thinking about consequences.
Sometimes being frugal means spending more money up front to save money and stress later. Sometimes it means spending money on things that matter to you so you don't feel deprived and end up making emotional purchases that blow your whole budget. Sometimes it means saying no to things other people think you should want so you can say yes to things that actually align with your values and goals. Let me tell you what hit me hardest about this book. Clare talks about how our relationship with money reflects our relationship with ourselves, and how learning to spend consciously is actually about learning to value yourself enough to make choices that support your real life instead of some theoretical life you think you should be living. She tells this story about a teacher who had been buying cheap work clothes for years because she felt guilty about spending money on herself. Her clothes never fit quite right, they wore out quickly, and she always felt a little uncomfortable and unprofessional at work. She told herself this was being responsible with money, but Clare helped her realize she was actually undermining her own confidence in career prospects by refusing to invest in herself. When this teacher finally bought a few pieces of higher quality work clothes that fit well and made her feel confident, she noticed that she participated more in meetings, felt more comfortable interacting with parents and administrators, and even started applying for leadership positions she had never considered before. The clothes didn't magically change her abilities, but feeling good about how she looked gave her permission to show up more fully as herself, which opened up opportunities she had been unconsciously blocking. Clare's point isn't that expensive clothes make you successful. It's that being cheap with yourself sends a message to your subconscious that you don't deserve nice things or that your comfort and confidence don't matter. Over time, this can affect how you show up in the world and what you think you deserve, which can actually limit your earning potential and life satisfaction in ways that cost way more than buying better clothes ever would. The final concept that ties everything together is what Clare calls values-based frugality, which is about getting clear on what you actually want your money to accomplish in your life and then making every spending decision serve those bigger goals. This isn't about following someone else's rules about what you should or shouldn't spend money on. It's about creating your own framework based on what matters most to you. Clare worked with a couple who were constantly arguing about money because one person thought they should save every possible penny and the other person thought they should enjoy their money while they were young. The problem wasn't that they had different approaches to money, it was that they had never talked about what they actually wanted their money to do for them. Once Clare helped them get clear on their shared values, they realized they both wanted financial security and they both wanted to enjoy their lives. They just had different ideas about how to balance those priorities. Once they created a plan that honored both values, the arguments stopped because every spending decision was measured against goals they had agreed on together. Values-based frugality means you might spend what seems like a lot of money on things that support your core values while spending very little on things that don't matter to you. Someone who values health might spend extra on organic food and a gym membership while driving an older car and living in a smaller apartment. Someone who values experiences might spend money on travel and concerts while buying generic groceries and shopping at thrift stores. Someone who values security might keep a larger emergency fund and choose less risky investments, while someone who values growth might invest more aggressively and keep less cash on hand. None of these approaches is right or wrong, they're just different ways of aligning your money with what you actually care about instead of just copying what personal finance experts who are successful people in your life happen to do. She also introduces this idea of mindful spending that goes beyond just tracking where your money goes. Mindful spending means paying attention to how your purchases actually affect your life after you make them. Do you use the things you buy? Do they make your life better or just clutter it up? Do you feel good about how you spent that money a week later, or do you wish you had chosen differently? Clare suggests doing a spending review every few months where you look back at your major purchases and honestly assess whether they were worth it, not just whether you could afford them, but whether they actually added value to your life in the way you hoped they would. This practice helps you learn your own patterns and get better at predicting which types of purchases will make you happy versus which ones will just temporarily fill an emotional need or solve a problem that didn't really exist. Over time, you develop what Clare calls spending wisdom, the ability to know almost instinctively when something is worth paying more for and when it's fine to go cheap. You learn to recognize the difference between wanting something because it would genuinely improve your life and wanting something because you're bored, stressed, or trying to keep up with other people. You start to see patterns in your own behavior and preferences that help you make better decisions without having to agonize over every purchase. As we wrap up, here's what I want you to take away from Clare's message.
Being smart with money isn't about spending as little as possible, it's about spending as intentionally as possible. It's about understanding that every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of life you want to live, and making sure those votes actually align with your real values and priorities instead of just your immediate impulses or social pressures. Frugal people understand that sometimes the most financially responsible thing you can do is spend more money up front to get something that will serve you better for longer. They understand that being cheap with yourself can actually be expensive in the long run, not just financially, but emotionally and practically too. They understand that true wealth isn't about having the most stuff or even saving the most money. It's about having enough resources to live according to your values without constant financial stress or compromise. When you stop confusing cheap with smart and start making spending decisions based on what will actually serve your real life, something amazing happens. You stop feeling guilty about the money you spend because you know it's going toward things that matter to you. You stop feeling deprived because you're investing in your actual priorities instead of just cutting expenses randomly. You stop feeling behind or inadequate because you're building a financial life that fits your values instead of trying to copy someone else's approach. And maybe most importantly, you start building real wealth, not just in your bank account, but in your daily experience of life, because your money is finally working for you instead of against you.